James Miller never expected to find himself in the center of an intergalactic diplomatic incident. As he stood in the gleaming observation deck of the Warrior Queen's flagship, surrounded by towering, athletic alien women in ceremonial armor, he couldn't help but wonder how a simple genetic researcher from Seattle had ended up here. The Valkyrians, as humans had dubbed them, were an all-female warrior race from the Andromeda Galaxy. Their society had achieved technological marvels beyond human comprehension, but they faced one critical challenge: genetic stagnation. Despite their incredible physical prowess and advanced civilization, their species was slowly dying out. Commander Era, the imposing leader of the Valkyrian Science Division, circled James with calculating golden eyes. Her midnight blue skin seemed to shimmer under the starlight streaming through the observation windows. "The humans' genetic markers are extraordinary," she announced to her assembled warriors, her universal translator converting her musical language into English. James shifted uncomfortably as holographic displays materialized around him, showing complex DNA sequences and compatibility matrices. He had originally been invited aboard as part of a human Valkyrian scientific exchange program, but things had taken an unexpected turn when their genetic scanners had analyzed him. "In all our centuries of searching across 12 galaxies," Era continued, her voice filled with barely contained excitement, "we have never encountered such perfect genetic compatibility. His DNA contains markers we thought lost to our species millennia ago." The assembled warriors murmured in appreciation, their ceremonial armor clicking softly as they moved. James noticed how their hands instinctively rested on their energy weapons, not out of threat, but from ingrained warrior discipline. "But what makes this human truly remarkable?" Era's second-in-command, Lieutenant Vale, stepped forward, her crimson armor reflecting the starlight. "Is the adaptive capacity of his genetic code. Our simulations suggest offspring would inherit not just our enhanced strength and longevity, but potentially new beneficial mutations we haven't seen in generations." James cleared his throat, finding his voice. "I understand the scientific significance," he said carefully, "but shouldn't we discuss the broader implications? This could revolutionize human-Valkyrian relations." A smile curved Era's lips, showing perfect white teeth. "Indeed. Which is why the Warrior Queen herself has declared you a prime mate candidate. The first human to ever receive such an honor." The assembled warriors straightened, their expressions a mix of respect and curiosity. James realized he was witnessing a historic moment, one that would forever change the relationship between humanity and the Valkyrians. As the stars wheeled slowly past the observation windows, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an adventure that would reshape the destiny of two species. The news of James's genetic compatibility spread through the Valkyrian flagship like wildfire. Within hours, the observation deck had been transformed into a grand ceremonial chamber, with holographic displays showing his DNA structure floating like artistic installations against the backdrop of space. But not everyone was pleased with this unprecedented situation. Captain Rena, decorated war hero and leader of the elite guard, stood before the assembled council of warriors with her arms crossed. Her pearl-white armor bore the marks of countless battles, and her violet eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "This goes against all tradition," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "A prime mate must prove their worth through combat. Our ancestors did not build this empire by considering only genetic compatibility." James, who had been given a seat of honor beside Commander Era, felt his stomach drop. He was a scientist, not a fighter, and the thought of facing these towering warrior women in combat made his blood run cold. Era rose to her feet, her commanding presence drawing all eyes. "The ancient laws are clear, but they are also adaptable. James has already proven his worth through his contributions to science. His research on genetic adaptation could save our species. Science alone does not make a warrior." Rena countered, then turned to face James directly. "If he is truly worthy of being a prime mate, let him face the trial of champions. Let him prove that humans are more than just interesting genetic specimens." A hush fell over the assembled warriors. The trial of champions was rarely invoked, a series of challenges designed to test not just physical prowess, but courage, strategy, and leadership. No off-worlder had ever been subjected to it. James stood up, his heart pounding but his voice steady. What exactly does this trial entail? Lieutenant Vale stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed various combat scenarios. 3 challenges, she explained. First, a test of mind, strategic combat simulation against our most advanced AI. Second, a test of spirit, survival in our sacred hunting grounds. Third, a test of body, ritual combat against a champion of the Council's choosing. The assembled warriors watched James intently, clearly expecting him to back down. Instead, he thought of Earth, of the potential benefits this alliance could bring to both species. More than that, he thought of how humanity had always risen to seemingly impossible challenges. I accept, he said firmly, surprising even himself with his resolve. But I have one condition. Captain Rena's eyebrows rose. You dare place conditions on our sacred trial? Yes, James replied, meeting her gaze steadily. If I succeed, this opens the door for future human-Valkyrian cooperation. Not just as mates, but as equals. Both our species have something to offer each other. Commander Era's lips curved into an approving smile. Spoken like a true diplomat, and a warrior. She turned to the council. I second his condition. The old ways must evolve if our species is to survive. The council members exchanged looks, then nodded one by one. Captain Rena's expression remained stern, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. Very well. The trial begins at dawn. Prepare yourself, human. You will need every ounce of your species' renowned adaptability to survive what comes next. As the assembly dispersed, James felt the weight of what he'd agreed to settle on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would either prove humanity's worth to these incredible beings or fail spectacularly in front of an audience of the galaxy's most formidable warriors. Commander Era placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Rest well, James Miller. Tomorrow, you make history, one way or another. The combat simulation chamber aboard the Valkyrian flagship was unlike anything James had ever seen. Quantum processors hummed softly in the walls, generating a perfect holographic battle environment around him. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. The trial of mind begins now, announced Lieutenant Vale from the observation platform above. You will face our most advanced tactical AI in a simulated warfare scenario. Victory conditions are simple. Capture the enemy's command center while protecting your own. James stood in what appeared to be a command center, holographic displays showing a complex battlefield spread out before him. He had a limited number of troops and resources at his disposal, facing off against an AI that had reportedly never lost a simulation. Commander Era watched from above, her expression neutral but her golden eyes intense. The AI has been programmed with every military strategy from 12 galaxies. It has never been defeated because it can calculate billions of possible outcomes per second. Then I'll have to do something it can't calculate, James muttered, studying the battlefield layout. His years of research had taught him that sometimes the most powerful solutions came from thinking outside conventional parameters. The simulation began. The AI immediately launched a multi-pronged attack, its forces moving with perfect precision. James found himself on the defensive, losing ground steadily for the first 10 minutes. The assembled warriors watched with growing disappointment, though not surprise. But James wasn't fighting to win, not yet. He was watching, learning, identifying patterns. The AI's perfection was its weakness. It operated on pure logic, on calculated probabilities and optimal strategies. Interesting approach, Captain Rena commented from above, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Losing slowly is still losing. James smiled. No, I'm not losing. I'm learning. With that, he began his real strategy. Instead of defending key positions, he started making seemingly random moves. He split his forces in ways that defied military logic, created deliberate gaps in his defenses, and positioned units in apparently useless locations. The AI's responses became increasingly predictable as it tried to capitalize on these perceived mistakes. That's when James sprung his trap. What looked like scattered, disorganized units suddenly revealed themselves to be a carefully orchestrated web. The AI, programmed to recognize and counter traditional military strategies, had failed to recognize the larger pattern until it was too late. Impossible, breathed Lieutenant Vale as the simulation's map began to shift dramatically. James's forces, moving in perfect synchronization, began closing in on the AI's command center from directions it hadn't adequately defended. Not impossible, Commander Era corrected, a smile playing at her lips. Simply unpredictable. He turned the AI's greatest strength into a weakness. The AI, faced with a strategy it couldn't categorize, began making errors as it tried to adapt. Its responses became increasingly erratic as James's forces pushed forward, using the chaos he deliberately created to their advantage. Within minutes, his troops had surrounded the AI's command center. The simulation ended with a decisive victory that left the observing warriors in stunned silence. How? Captain Rena demanded, her violet eyes narrow with suspicion. How did you defeat an AI that knows every battle strategy in the known galaxy? James stepped out of the simulation chamber, his heart still racing from the intensity of the experience. By not using any known strategy at all. The AI was programmed to recognize and counter patterns, so I gave it anti-patterns. Sometimes the best move is the one that appears illogical until it's too late to counter it. Commander Era stepped forward, her expression proud. The first trial is complete. You have proven that human adaptability and creativity can triumph over even the most advanced artificial intelligence. But do not celebrate yet, the trial of spirit awaits, and no amount of clever strategy can prepare you for what lurks in our sacred hunting grounds. As James looked at the impressed faces around him, he realized he had done more than just pass a test. He had shown that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in processing power or physical might, but in their ability to think in ways that defied conventional logic. The transport ship descended through layers of purple clouds, revealing a landscape that defied earthly description. The sacred hunting grounds of the Valkyrians spread out below, a vast wilderness where crystalline trees sparkled under twin moons and bioluminescent creatures prowled through mists of shifting colors. The trial of spirit is simple, Commander Era explained as they landed. Survive for 3 planetary cycles. Find the Temple of Ancestors at the heart of the hunting grounds. No weapons, no technology. She paused, her golden eyes serious. Many warriors have died attempting this trial. James stood at the transport's exit ramp, dressed in basic survival gear. The air smelled like cinnamon and ozone, an alien combination that made his head spin slightly. Any advice? Captain Rena stepped forward, unexpected respect in her voice. After your performance in the simulation, I will offer one warning. The creatures here hunt in ways your Earth predators never evolved to. They don't just track by sight or smell, they sense fear, doubt, and weakness. The transport's ramp lowered, and James felt the warm, strange air wash over him. The assembled warriors would monitor him from orbit, but he would face the challenges alone. As he stepped onto the alien soil, the transport lifted off, leaving him surrounded by the ethereal beauty and deadly mystery of the hunting grounds. His first challenge came within hours. The crystalline forest's beauty was deceptive, the trees themselves were predatory. Their branches moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, trying to encircle anything that stayed still too long. James discovered this when he stopped to rest and noticed the shifting shadows weren't quite natural. But it was the psychological aspect that proved most challenging. The environment itself seemed designed to disorient and confuse. Colors shifted without pattern, sounds came from impossible directions, and the very ground seemed to pulse with alien life. As night fell, the true hunters emerged. Creatures that seemed to phase between solid and vapor stalked through the underbrush. James remembered Rena's warning and forced himself to control his fear, to think rationally. He observed that the predators moved in predictable patterns despite their otherworldly nature. Using skills honed through years of research expeditions on Earth, James began to understand the ecosystem's rhythm. The crystalline trees weren't just predators, they were also shelter if you knew how to use them. By studying how the local herbivores moved, he learned to recognize safe zones where the branches wouldn't encircle him. On the second day, he encountered what the Valkyrians called a mind mist, a naturally occurring phenomenon that induced hallucinations and panic. Instead of fighting it, James remembered his victory against the AI. Sometimes the best strategy wasn't to resist but to adapt. He let the hallucinations wash over him, maintaining his core sense of self while allowing his mind to float through the experience. The mist, seemingly confused by his acceptance, dissipated more quickly than usual. From orbit, the Valkyrian warriors watched with growing amazement. "He's not just surviving," Lieutenant Vale observed. "He's learning, adapting, becoming part of the environment." Commander Era nodded, pride evident in her expression. "This is why his genetic code is so valuable. Humans don't just endure, they understand, adapt, and grow stronger through challenge." By the third day, James had mapped the hunting grounds patterns in his mind. The Temple of Ancestors stood atop a crystalline mountain, its ancient spires reaching toward the twin moons. The final approach would be the most dangerous. The temple was surrounded by the densest concentration of predators. But James had learned something crucial about this alien world. Everything was connected. The predators, the trees, the mind mists, they were all part of a larger pattern. And patterns, no matter how alien, could be understood. As he prepared for the final push to the temple, James realized that this trial had taught him something profound about both himself and humanity's place in the galaxy. Sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in conquering an alien environment, but in becoming part of its dance. The Temple of Ancestors loomed before James, its crystalline spires catching the light of the twin moons and fracturing it into thousands of rainbow patterns. The final climb had been treacherous. Swarms of phase-shifting predators had forced him to time his ascent perfectly, using their own hunting patterns to slip through their ranks. Now, standing before the ancient structure, James felt a strange resonance. The temple walls hummed with an energy he could feel in his bones. Ancestral glyphs carved into the crystal surfaces seemed to shift and move in his peripheral vision, telling stories he could almost understand. From orbit, Commander Era and the other warriors watched intently. "He's reached the temple faster than any candidate in our recorded history," Lieutenant Vale noted, checking the ancient records. "Because he didn't fight his way there," Captain Rena observed, her tone thoughtful rather than critical. "He moved like a ghost through our sacred hunting grounds, becoming one with them instead of conquering them." The temple entrance was a towering archway of pure crystal, unmarked by any door or barrier. As James stepped through, ancient systems hummed to life. The air inside was perfectly still, heavy with the weight of millennia. Holographic figures materialized around him, echoes of ancient Valkyrian warriors, their forms flickering with stored memories. They spoke in their ancient tongue, but somehow James understood their meaning. The temple wasn't just a destination, it was a repository of their species' history. The holograms told a story that changed everything. The Valkyrians hadn't always been an all-female warrior race. Their current form was the result of ancient genetic engineering, an attempt to create the perfect warriors. But the modification had come with a price: genetic stagnation and eventual extinction unless new, compatible DNA could be found. "The temple is showing him our greatest shame," Commander Era whispered, watching from orbit. "The truth we hide even from our own people." The central chamber of the temple held a massive crystalline database, its surface covered in flowing data streams that resembled liquid light. As James approached, it reacted to his presence, scanning him down to the cellular level. Ancient machinery hummed to life, and a holographic display filled the chamber. It showed his DNA structure intertwined with Valkyrian genetic code, but in a way that suggested something revolutionary. The compatibility wasn't just random chance. It was predicted, expected, planned for. "Impossible," Captain Rena breathed, watching the data stream in. "The temple's records, they spoke of this. A species that would arise, whose genetic structure would be the key to our salvation. We thought it was just an ancient legend." The holographic ancestors spoke again, their messages clear now. Humanity's genetic adaptability wasn't just compatible with Valkyrian DNA, it was complementary. As if somewhere in the distant past, both species had been designed to eventually find each other. James stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the swirling data streams of both species' genetic histories. He understood now why this was called the trial of spirit. It wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding, about seeing the deeper connection between their peoples. The final trial approaches. Commander Era's voice echoed through the temple's communication system. But now you understand what you're really fighting for. This isn't just about proving yourself worthy as a prime mate. It's about the destiny of both our species. As James emerged from the temple, the twin moons had aligned perfectly overhead, bathing the crystal mountain in ethereal light. He knew the final trial, ritual combat, would be his greatest challenge yet. But he also knew something the Valkyrians didn't. Humans had their own legends of warrior women from the stars. Perhaps both species had been carrying pieces of the same story, waiting for the moment when they would finally come together. The combat arena aboard the Valkyrian flagship was packed with warriors from every battle fleet in their armada. News of the temple's revelation had spread quickly, and now thousands of violet, blue, and silver-skinned warriors watched intently as James entered the ceremonial fighting ring. The arena itself was a marvel of alien engineering, a circular platform surrounded by energy fields that shifted and pulsed with power. Floating platforms at various heights created a three-dimensional battlefield, challenging combatants to think in all directions. Captain Rena stepped forward, her pearl-white armor now adorned with ceremonial markings. "I claim the right of challenge," she announced, her voice carrying across the arena. "As the greatest warrior of our generation, I will test whether humanity's strength truly matches the ancient prophecy." Commander Era nodded solemnly. "The terms are set. Victory comes through submission or ring out. Lethal force is forbidden." She paused, looking at both combatants. "Begin!" Rena moved with incredible speed, her enhanced physiology allowing her to cross the arena faster than any human athlete could match. But James had learned much during his trials. Instead of trying to match her speed, he used her momentum against her, sidestepping at the last moment in a move he'd learned from watching the phase predators. "You've learned our ways well," Rena commented, recovering instantly. "But learning is not mastery." She launched into a series of lightning-fast attacks, her movements a blur of practiced perfection. James defended as best he could, drawing on everything he'd experienced. He moved like the crystalline trees, bending without breaking. He anticipated like he had against the AI, looking for patterns within patterns. He stayed calm in the face of overwhelming force, just as he had in the mind mists. The crowd watched in amazement as the human held his own against their greatest warrior. But both combatants knew this was more than a fight, it was the final proof of compatibility between their species. "You understand now, don't you?" James said as they circled each other on one of the floating platforms. "Why your ancestors engineered your species this way? They weren't just creating warriors, they were creating guardians. Protectors of something greater." Rena's attacks became more focused, probing for weaknesses. "And what do humans know of being guardians?" "Everything," James replied, executing a perfect counter-move. "It's in our DNA, literally, as your temple showed us. The drive to protect, to nurture, to help others survive and thrive. Your ancestors saw that potential in humanity's future." The battle moved through all dimensions of the arena, both fighters pushing themselves to their limits. Rena's superior strength and speed were matched against James's adaptability and unconventional thinking. The turning point came when James stopped trying to win and instead focused on proving something greater. He turned Rena's own attacks into opportunities for cooperation, showing how their different strengths could work together rather than against each other. Finally, in a move that left the audience gasping, both warriors found themselves in a perfect stalemate, each capable of eliminating the other, each choosing not to. "Enough!" Commander Era's voice rang out. "The trial is complete. Both warriors have proven themselves worthy." Rena stepped back, a smile of genuine respect on her face. "You never tried to defeat me," she realized. You were showing us a better way. James nodded. The temple showed me that our species aren't meant to compete, we're meant to complement each other. Your strength and our adaptability. Your discipline and our creativity. Together, we're stronger than either of us alone. Commander Era descended to the arena floor. The trials are complete. James Miller of Earth has proven himself not just as a primate, but as the living proof of our ancestors' wisdom. Let this day mark the beginning of a new era for both our species. As the assembled warriors cheered, James and Rena clasped arms in the traditional Valkyrian warrior's salute. The gesture symbolized more than respect between fighters, it represented hope for both their peoples. The age of isolation was over. Together, humans and Valkyrians would face the galaxy's challenges as equals, their combined strength greater than the sum of their parts. And it all began because one human dared to show that true strength lies not in domination, but in understanding.